Did you dismiss her because you were busy, or because you looked at her and decided she wasn't worth your time?
I was busy.
And
She looked at the old woman in the lobby and decided in the space of 30 seconds that she wasn't worth her time. She was wrong about a lot of things. She was most wrong about that. If you've ever watched someone disrespect a person they didn't understand the value of, stay until the end. This one's going to hit differently. Before we go anywhere, if you're new here, hit subscribe because we tell stories like this every single week and you do not want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into it. Yuna Park had been Seo Jin-ho's executive secretary for 14 months, his girlfriend for 6, and the most strategically positioned person in the building for approximately 11 of those 14 months, which was how she thought about most things in her life, including relationships, in terms of position, advantage, and what a given situation was likely to yield over time. She was not a cruel person exactly. She was a precise one. She had grown up in a household where resources were scarce and attention was scarcer, and she had learned early that the world responded to confidence and presentation and the specific performance of belonging somewhere, even before you had fully earned the right to belong there. She dressed impeccably. She spoke carefully. She had cultivated, over 29 years, an exterior so polished that most people never looked past it to ask what was underneath. What was underneath was a woman who was acutely, perpetually aware of her own position and deeply uncomfortable with anything that threatened to destabilize it. Seo Jin-ho was the kind of man who destabilized rooms simply by entering them. He was 37, the head of an organization that the Korean business press covered with the careful, euphemistic language used for things they didn't fully want to name, and he carried the particular authority of someone who had never once, in his adult life, needed to raise his voice to be heard. He was also, Yuna had observed over 6 months of proximity, the kind of man who noticed everything and commented on almost none of it, which meant that his silences contained considerably more information than most people's speeches if you knew how to read them. She had learned to read them. She considered this one of her primary professional achievements. She had not, in 14 months of managing his schedule and 6 months of managing considerably more, met his mother. This was not, she would later understand, an accident. The morning it happened was a Thursday in October, the kind of day that had been organized down to the minute. Jin-ho was in back-to-back meetings until noon, a lunch with someone whose name appeared in no official directory, and an afternoon she had blocked with the kind of vague placeholder description that meant things she wasn't supposed to know about. She was at her desk outside his office, managing the 4th crisis of the morning with the efficient calm of a woman who had long since stopped being surprised by the volume of things that required managing when the elevator opened. The woman who stepped out was in her late 60s, small-framed, wearing a coat that had been good quality once and was now simply well cared for, carrying a covered container that smelled, even from across the reception area, of something warm and homemade. Her hair was gray-white, natural, worn in a soft halo that she hadn't tried to tame into anything more formal. She looked around the reception area with the unhurried interest of someone who found the world generally worth paying attention to, and then she smiled at Yuna. Warm, direct, the smile of someone who smiled at people because they were people, and that seemed like reason enough. Yuna's first assessment, conducted in approximately 4 seconds, was not a client, not connected to anything on the schedule, elderly, informally dressed, carrying food, possible cleaning staff relative, possible wrong floor. "Can I help you?" she said with the specific inflection of "can I help you?" That means I doubt it, but I'm required to ask. "Oh, I'm just here to drop something off for my son," the woman said, in English accented with something southern and warm. "I made his favorite. I know he never eats properly on days like this." Yuna looked at the container, then at the woman with the expression she wore when something was taking up time she didn't have. "Mr. Seo is in meetings all morning. He can't be disturbed." "I know, baby. I don't need to see him. I can just leave it with you." Yuna's eyes moved to the container with the specific reluctance of someone being asked to become a food storage facility. This isn't really. She stopped, recalibrated, produced the version of this that sounded professional rather than simply dismissive. "I'm afraid we can't accept personal deliveries at the executive level. You'd need to leave it with reception downstairs." The woman looked at her for a moment with the particular patience of someone who has encountered this kind of dismissal before and has made their peace with it without making peace with the people who deliver it. "It'll get cold by the time it gets up here," she said gently. "It's just soup. I understand, Una said, in the tone that meant she understood and also didn't care. Reception downstairs can hold it for him. I've been here before, the woman said. Jinho usually... Mr. Seo's schedule today doesn't allow for interruptions of any kind. Una had already returned her attention to her screen, the conversation categorized and closed in her internal filing system. Downstairs reception. They'll make sure he gets a message. There was a pause. Una didn't look up from her screen during it. All right, the woman said quietly. I'm sorry to bother you. She got back in the elevator, the doors closed. Una returned to the crisis she'd been managing, which resolved itself in the next 7 minutes and then moved to the next item on the list. And the old woman with the soup was filed in the category of minor interruptions handled and did not cross her mind again for the rest of the morning. If you're already feeling where this is going, drop a comment and subscribe if you haven't yet, because this kind of story is what we do here every week. Now, back to it. She found out at 12:47 when Jinho came out of his last morning meeting and stopped at her desk in the way he sometimes stopped, not for anything specific, just checking the landscape, the brief daily calibration of a man who kept track of everything that moved through his space. Anything this morning? He asked. The Henderson file came back with revisions, the 2 o'clock confirmed, and... She paused, remembering the interruption with the efficiency of someone cross-referencing a log. An older woman came by with food, said she was someone's mother. I sent her to reception downstairs. Jinho was very still for a moment. It was a different kind of stillness than his usual one. Not the stillness of a man thinking, but the stillness of a man who has just received information and is deciding very precisely what to do with it. She noticed it the way she noticed all his tells, catalogued it in the fraction of a second before his expression returned to its default, and felt for the first time that morning a faint and unspecific unease. Describe her, he said. Una described her. The coat, the container, the gray hair, the smile. Jinho looked at her for a moment that lasted considerably longer than it needed to, and then he said, very quietly, "That was my mother." The specific quality of the silence that followed was one Una had never encountered before in 14 months of managing his office. It wasn't angry, it wasn't cold exactly. It was the silence of a man absorbing something and deciding, with the methodical precision he brought to all decisions, exactly what it meant and what it required. "I'll call her," he said. "Clear my 1 o'clock." He went back into his office and closed the door, and Una sat at her desk with the very specific feeling of someone who has made an error so significant that the full shape of it is still coming into focus. He was on the phone for 22 minutes. Una knew because she tracked everything, including things she would have been wiser not to track too carefully, and she spent those 22 minutes at her desk with the efficient focus of someone performing normality, while a significant portion of her attention was occupied elsewhere. She heard nothing through the office door. Jinho was not a man who raised his voice on phone calls, which told her nothing about the content and everything about the quality of his control. When he came out, he stood at her desk and said, "Come in." Not a question. The specific inflection of an instruction that expected to be followed. She followed it. His office was the kind of room that had been designed to communicate authority without announcing it. Dark wood, clean lines, a desk that was large enough to mean something without being large enough to be obvious about it, windows that showed the city in a way that made the city look like something he owned rather than something he inhabited. She had spent considerable time in this room over 14 months. She had never, until this moment, felt the room work against her. He stood behind his desk rather than sitting, which she noted. He looked at her with the expression she had spent 6 months learning to read and now, for the first time, found she couldn't. "Tell me what happened this morning," he said. "All of it." From the moment the elevator opened. She told him. She told him with the same precision she brought to all reporting, factual, sequential, nothing added and nothing omitted, because she was not a woman who embellished in professional contexts, and she understood with the instinct of someone very good at reading rooms that embellishment was the last thing this room wanted. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "My mother," he said, "is 71 years old. She raised me alone after my father died, working 2 jobs in a city that was not always kind to her. She has never, in my adult life, asked me for anything she felt she could manage without asking for. She came here today because she knew I hadn't eaten properly in 3 days, and she made the soup I liked when I was sick as a child." He paused. The pause had a weight to it that she felt in her chest. She has been to this office 4 times in the last 2 years. Every person on this floor knows who she is. Every person on this floor has been told explicitly that she is to be treated as she would be treated if I were standing next to her, which is the way you would treat someone who matters more to me than anyone or anything in this building. Yuna absorbed this with the specific stillness of someone receiving information that is reorganizing their understanding of the last 3 hours in real time. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't know, he said. Well, I'm not finished. She waited. My mother told me what happened. She told me the way she tells me things, without complaint, without drama, without asking me to do anything about it. She told me because I asked, and because she doesn't lie to me, and because the version of the story she told me is the version I'm asking you to confirm or correct. His eyes were steady on hers. She said that when she explained she was there to drop off food for her son, she was told that personal deliveries weren't accepted at the executive level. She said that when she explained the food would get cold, she was dismissed. She said that when she mentioned she had been here before and that I usually... And she stopped herself, out of what I suspect was the particular grace of a woman who was not going to complete that sentence in a way that cost either of you dignity. And then she apologized for bothering you and got back in the elevator. Yuna said nothing. There was nothing, in that moment, that she could have said that wouldn't have made it worse. She apologized, Jinho said, and for the first time something moved through his voice that wasn't controlled. Not anger, something colder and more lasting. The specific grief of a son who has just heard that his mother apologized to someone for the inconvenience of existing. My mother apologized to you for bringing me soup. If this story is landing somewhere real for you, drop a like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments if you've ever seen someone disrespect a person they didn't understand. Now, back to the story. The conversation that followed was not the one Yuna had been preparing for during the 22 minutes of the phone call. She had been preparing, with the strategic efficiency she brought to all challenges, for anger. Visible, manageable anger that she could respond to with accountability and apology and the specific performance of remorse that, in her experience, tended to move difficult situations toward resolution. She had handled difficult situations before. She was good at it. What she was not prepared for was the quiet. Jinho sat down finally, which removed the specific pressure of his standing, and looked at her across the desk with an expression she had never seen from him in 6 months of believing she knew his expressions. I need to understand something, he said, and I need you to answer honestly, because I'm going to know if you're not, and I'd rather you be honest than manage me. He paused. Did you dismiss her because you were busy, or because you looked at her and decided she wasn't worth your time? Yuna opened her mouth, closed it. The honest answer was somewhere between the two, and the space between them was not a comfortable one to occupy. I was busy, she said finally, and She stopped, started again. I didn't recognize her as someone who warranted... She stopped again, hearing the words as they came out and understanding precisely why they were the wrong ones. Warranted, Jinho said. I didn't know who she was. That's what I'm asking about, he said, with a patience that was considerably more difficult to sit with than anger would have been. I'm not asking whether you knew her name. I'm asking whether, if she had walked off that elevator in a different coat, you would have treated her differently. And I need you to think about that question before you answer it, because it's the one that matters. Yuna thought about it. It was not a comfortable thing to think about. The coat had been well cared for but old. The woman had been gray-haired, unhurried, carrying homemade food. She had been in the taxonomy that Yuna had constructed over 29 years of strategic social navigation, in a category that her system had automatically assigned low priority. She had not asked herself whether the woman mattered. She had looked at her and answered that question without asking it. I don't know, she said, which was the most honest thing she had said in the conversation, and they both understood what it meant. Jinho was quiet for a long moment. My mother grew up in Georgia, he said. She came to Seoul at 24 with my father, who she'd met when he was studying in the States. When he died, she stayed because by then I was Korean in more ways than I was anything else, and she wasn't going to take me from the only home I'd known. She cleaned offices in this building for 11 years. This building specifically. A pause. I bought it 4 years ago, partly because I wanted her to never have to clean anything again, and partly because I wanted her to be able to walk through the front doors of a place where she had once been invisible and have every single person in it know who she was. Yuna sat with that for a moment, feeling the full weight of what she had done settle into something she couldn't rationalize away. "She cleaned offices in buildings like this," she said softly, "and I sent her to the lobby." "You sent her to the lobby," he confirmed, "and she apologized to you for the inconvenience." She asked what happened next. Not to him, to herself, alone in the elevator going down at the end of a day that had been, in its quiet and devastating way, the most clarifying day of her professional and personal life. She had not been fired. Jin-ho was not, she understood now, with a clarity she wished she'd had 14 months ago, a man who made decisions in the heat of things. He had concluded the conversation with the specific, measured finality of someone who had said what needed to be said and was now going to take the time to decide what came next. He had not told her the relationship was over. He had not told her she still had a job. He had simply looked at her, at the end, with an expression that contained both the man she had spent 6 months believing she knew and a stranger she was only now beginning to understand, and said, "I need some time." She had nodded. She had left. In the elevator, going down through the floors of a building where an old woman had once been invisible, Una Park did something she hadn't done in a professional context in a very long time. She let herself feel the full weight of what she'd done without immediately looking for the way to manage it. It was not a comfortable feeling. She suspected it was supposed to be. Jin-ho went to his mother that evening. He went the way he went to most things that mattered. Without announcement, without ceremony, simply present at the door of her apartment in the building he'd moved her into 3 years ago, the building whose address he had never given to anyone at the office except his head of security. She opened the door and looked at him with the expression of a woman who had been expecting this visit and had made tea in preparation for it. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know," he said, and came in anyway. Her apartment was the specific kind of warm that comes from decades of accumulated life rather than interior design. Photographs on every surface, a quilt on the couch that she had made herself over a winter when her hands needed something to do, the smell of the soup she had not been able to deliver sitting on the stove in a pot that she had apparently come home and reheated rather than waste. He sat at her kitchen table the way he had sat at kitchen tables his entire life, slightly too large for the chair, filling the space around him in a way he'd never quite managed to contain, and she put a bowl in front of him without asking. He ate. She sat across from him and watched him eat with the specific, quiet satisfaction of a woman for whom feeding her child was one of the few uncomplicated pleasures the world reliably offered. "Tell me what she said to you," he said, between the first and second bowl. "All of it. Not the version you told me on the phone." "The version I told you on the phone was all of it, Jin-ho." "You stopped a sentence." She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had always known her son noticed everything and had never fully decided whether to be proud of it or exasperated. "She said she couldn't accept personal deliveries at the executive level," she said. "And when I said I'd just leave it with her, there was a look. You know the kind. Like I was something she was waiting to be finished with." She paused, and then she said I'd need to go to reception downstairs, in the voice people use when they've already moved on in their heads. And when I mentioned that I'd been here before... Another pause. "I stopped because I was going to say that you usually came out to get me yourself, and I didn't want to say that to her. It seemed unkind, given what was already happening." Jin-ho set down his spoon. "She made you feel like you weren't supposed to be there." "Baby?" His mother's voice was gentle, which was worse than if it had been hard. "That woman didn't make me feel anything I haven't felt before. I've been in enough lobbies in my life to recognize that particular welcome. What bothered me wasn't how she made me feel. It was that she looked at me and made a whole decision about who I was worth in about 4 seconds without asking a single question." She folded her hands on the table. "And the thing is, and this is the part I didn't say on the phone, because I knew it would make you do something permanent. The thing is, she reminded me of myself, at 29. Before life did the work of teaching me that the categories I put people in said a great deal more about my own fear than they said about the people." Jin-ho looked at his mother for a long moment. "You're being more generous than she deserves." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I know what it looks like when someone is running a system they built to survive, and the system has a blind spot they haven't found yet." She met his eyes. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "Are you going to end it?" He was quiet. "She's been good to you," his mother said. Not a defense exactly, an observation, offered with the precision of someone who believed in accuracy even when accuracy was inconvenient. In the ways she knows how to be good to someone, She just doesn't know how to be good to someone she hasn't assigned value to yet. And the question of whether that can change? She shrugged, the small, elegant shrug of a woman who had lived long enough to know the answer to that question was genuinely uncertain. That's not mine to answer. It's mine, he said. It's hers, his mother corrected gently. You can give her the room to answer it. Whether she does, that's entirely up to her. He stayed for another hour, finished a second bowl of soup that he hadn't planned on, and left with the specific, settled quality of a man who's been to the one place in the world where he doesn't have to perform anything, and has been reminded, as he always was in this kitchen, of what actually mattered. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because the kind of clarity this story is building toward is the kind we try to put into every single one we tell. Drop a like if you're still with us. Now, the last part. Yuna called his mother on Saturday morning. She had obtained the number through Jin Ho's emergency contact list, which she had access to in her capacity as his executive secretary and which she was almost certainly not supposed to use for this purpose. She used it anyway, which was, she would later think, the first genuinely unstrategic decision she had made in years. The phone rang 4 times. She had prepared during those 4 rings for voicemail. Hello? The voice was warm and southern and exactly as she remembered it from the lobby, which made the conversation she was about to have considerably harder than she'd been hoping for. Mrs. Sao, this is Yuna Park. I know who you are, baby. A pause. I wanted to call and apologize. For Thursday. For the way I spoke to you and the way She stopped. For dismissing you. That's the accurate word. I dismissed you, and I'm sorry. There was a quiet on the other end that was different from the silence she usually managed. Not a silence she could fill with the right words, but a silence that was waiting to see whether the words she'd already said were the real ones or the performed ones. I appreciate you calling, Mrs. Essio said finally. That took something? It took less than it should have, Yuna said, which is part of what I've been thinking about since Thursday. What else have you been thinking about? She hadn't expected the question. She answered it anyway because she had called to be honest, and being honest required answering questions you hadn't prepared for. I've been thinking about the way I look at people, she said, the way I sort them. I built a system a long time ago for deciding quickly who mattered and who didn't, and I told myself it was efficiency, and I think it's something else. Something I built when I was young and didn't have very much, and I've kept using it long past the point where I needed it. Mrs. Seo was quiet for a moment. What's going to happen to the system? I'm going to dismantle it, Yuna said, starting with this call. Another quiet. Then, you're not calling for Jinho, are you? You're calling for you. Yes, Yuna said, though I understand if that changes whether it means anything to you. It doesn't change it, Mrs. Seo said. If anything, it changes it the right direction. A pause, warmer than the ones before it. The soup is still here if you wanted to know. I reheated it Thursday night. I'll probably make more on Sunday. Yuna felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight since Thursday morning. He never eats properly on long days, she said. He never has, his mother agreed. 37 years, and I'm still fighting this battle. It was not forgiveness exactly, not yet, and Yuna understood that it wasn't hers to expect on a timeline that suited her, but it was the beginning of something that felt, for the first time in days, like it might be real rather than managed, and she held it carefully, the way you hold things that are still fragile. Jinho asked her to dinner on Wednesday, not at the restaurant where they usually went, somewhere smaller, somewhere that didn't announce anything, and she understood from the choice of location that this was a conversation rather than a resumption. She told him about the phone call. She told him all of it, including the parts where she'd understood things about herself that she hadn't been comfortable understanding. He listened the way he always listened, completely without organizing his response while she was still talking, and when she finished he was quiet for a moment with the quality of quiet that she had, over 14 months, finally learned to trust. My mother told me you called, he said. I thought she might. She told me what you said, about the system. He looked at her across the small table with the expression she had spent 6 months cataloging and now understood she had only been partially reading. I want to tell you something about my mother that I should have told you a long time ago, and I'm aware that not telling you contributed to what happened Thursday. Not caused it, contributed to it. You don't have to. I didn't introduce you to her, he said, in 6 months. I told myself it was because I wanted to be certain before I brought the 2 most important parts of my life into the same room. I think the more honest version is that I wanted to protect her from exactly what happened, which means some part of me already knew something I didn't want to know. He paused. That's not an absolution. It's just an honest account of my part in it. Yuna looked at the man she had spent 6 months believing she understood and understood finally, that understanding someone was not the same as knowing them. I want to know her, she said. If she'll let me, and if you'll let me, I want to actually know her. Not because of you, because of who she is. Who do you think she is? Someone who raised you alone and cleaned offices in a building you now own and makes soup on Thursday mornings because she knows you haven't eaten. She paused. Someone who apologized to me for the inconvenience of existing, because that's the grace she carries, and who told you the story without drama because she doesn't need you to fight her battles. Someone who could have ended this on Thursday and instead reheated the soup and made more on Sunday. She met his eyes. Someone I should have recognized the moment she smiled at me. Jinho looked at her for a long moment, at the woman he had spent 6 months watching navigate the world with the efficiency of someone who had learned that precision was protection, watching her, for the first time, navigate something without the system running underneath it. Sunday, he said. She makes lunch on Sundays. I'll ask her if she'd like company. Mrs. Seo said yes, in the specific way she said most things, without making a performance of the generosity it required. Simply yes, come at noon, and then going back to whatever she'd been doing before he called. Jinho relayed this to Yuna with the quiet precision that she had, over 14 months, entirely failed to understand was his version of warmth, and she received it with the specific, careful gratitude of someone who understood they were being given something that hadn't been owed to them. She brought flowers on Sunday. Then she put them back in the car because they seemed like the kind of gesture that was about managing the impression she made rather than about the person she was making it to, and she went in empty-handed and let the visit be what it was going to be without trying to arrange it first. Mrs. Seo opened the door, looked at her for a moment with the unhurried assessment of a woman who took her time deciding things, and then stepped aside to let her in. The apartment smelled of the soup, the quilt was on the couch. The photographs covered every surface, and in one of them, small, in a frame that had been cheap once and was now simply loved, a much younger version of Jinho was sitting at the same kitchen table, too large for the chair even then, looking at his mother with an expression that Yuna recognized suddenly as the expression he wore when he thought no one was watching. She stopped in front of it. He was 8, Mrs. Seo said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of tea she hadn't been asked to make. Wouldn't eat his vegetables. Tried to negotiate with me. Lost. He still tries to negotiate, Yuna said, before she could decide whether to say it. Mrs. Seo looked at her with something that was the beginning of warmth. Not performed, not given freely yet, but present. Available. The specific expression of a woman who was watching to see whether this was the real version or the managed one, and was tentatively beginning to believe it might be the real one. He does, she agreed. He always loses. It was not by any measure a fully resolved ending. There were things between Yuna and the woman sitting across from her that would need time and more Sundays, and the specific unglamorous work of changing a habit of mind that had taken 29 years to build. There were things between Yuna and Jinho that still needed honest conversation and the kind of patience that couldn't be strategized. But she was here. She had come in empty-handed. The soup was warm and the tea was good, and an old woman who had cleaned offices in buildings like this one had made space at her table for someone who hadn't known, until 4 days ago, how to deserve it. Some reckonings don't announce themselves. They arrive on Thursday mornings with covered containers and warm smiles, and they teach you, in the space of a lobby and a quiet conversation and a phone call you make for yourself rather than for anyone else, exactly who you have been and exactly who you still have time to become. If this story made you think about how you see people, drop a comment and tell me. And subscribe, because we tell stories like this every single week, and you deserve to be here for all of them. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.